All right, so for Francisco and his family, and really for all the students and families here, graduating with a PhD is the culmination of lots of years of hard work. And for faculty, sometimes it feels very similar. You know, we get a PhD application that we're really excited about. We convince you to come to school here, and then we have you in a couple of our classes. We read lots of your essays, some of them good, some of them less good. And in many ways, it's a long process for faculty as well. But for today, for me, for Francisco, it doesn't feel like that at all. Literally, I had only been here a year and a half, and I had never met Francisco. And just 2 years ago, he emailed me and said, "Can I talk to you about my dissertation, and can we do a directed reading on the political economy of taxation?" And what I quickly discovered was that in Francisco, I had a new colleague to learn from, and that I was going to be the beneficiary of all the hard work he had done to fashion himself as a real scholar in the years before I had even met him. He had this critical but appreciative and constructive way of reading and relating to the work of previous scholars. He was generous in his efforts to others, whether they were other graduate students helping them with their research problems or faculty as well. And then he was full of all these creative ideas about research, and then he already had all the technical skills in order to translate those ideas into exciting research projects. And then always, and perhaps most importantly, he was super positive. He just has this can-do way of thinking about it, whatever the task is. He has this positive outlook on how he's going to go about tackling it. So today, we're celebrating his dissertation, and I just want to really focus and describe one of the papers to you briefly. So very broadly, Francisco, what is the title of your dissertation?
It's Essays on State Capacity.
Okay, that sounds better. I thought there was a version in which it was essays on taxation, and I was like, everybody's eyes would glaze over. Okay, so he's interested in state capacity, and I want to convince you very quickly that state capacity is just our state's able to raise the revenue they need to provide the public goods that are needed in order to enhance human flourishing and development. And so it's a really important thing to think about. And what Francisco does is he says, hey, the literature out there is focused on war and it's focused on limited government. And he says those things are important, but there's just so much variation left in the world in thinking about why some states are able to provide their citizens with public goods and others are not. And so what he argues, he identifies elite competition as a major impediment to building state capacity. Competing elites are ambivalent about investing in state capacity if it's going to be their opponent who's going to enjoy the fruits of their investment. In his account, elites only make investments when they can reasonably expect to benefit from that power, or at least not be a victim of it. So consequently, what's important in thinking about when states are going to invest in state capacity is if there are negative shocks to the power of a competitor, it can lead governments to have more of an incentive to make these investments. So what's important about this project, he has an original argument, but he also and I think this distinguishes him significantly from the existing literature, is this is not obviously a correct argument. So one could imagine alternative formulations of the investment problem that arrive at very different conclusions. So to test his argument empirically, Francisco studies state building in municipalities in post-revolutionary Mexico. This empirical setting at one level is just interesting for understanding substantively the history of state building in Mexico, but it's also chosen in order for its research design characteristics. Essentially what he's able to do is develop a research design which he can present credible causal estimates of the effect of variation in the dominance of elite groups on state building. So while the existing literature on state capacity is really empirically rich, lots of history, lots of really great stuff, there's almost no studies that allow for credible causal inferences about the factors influencing state capacity. The design in Francisco's paper is based on using the differential effects of price shocks during the Great Depression on the relative power of landowners versus local political bosses who came to power during and immediately after the revolution. So price shocks affected the relative power of landowners differently depending on the characteristics of the land that they owned and the commodities in which they specialized. So Francisco shows that negative price shocks increased the number of local level bureaucrats in Mexican municipalities. That is, they invested in state capacity during this period, and that effect is long-lived. It has an impact well after the period immediately after the revolution. So this is a convincing study, and it suggests an important alternative path for the development of state capacity. I think both the argument and even more importantly, the research design will inspire future research. So what we're going to see is, yes, he's answered this question really good for a time and place that he studied, but other researchers will apply it to other historical periods and places. So there have been many distinguished contributions to this literature, but Francisco makes a distinctive and important new one. And one early sign, I'm happy to report, of Francisco's project's quality is that he just last week recently won APSA's Fiona McGillivray Award for the best paper in political economy presented at last year's APSA. So Francisco, congratulations on your graduation. We thank you for being such a great contributor to the political science community at Stanford, and we are excited for your future as you start your new job as an assistant professor at UCSD's Global Policy and Strategy School.